Welcome back. Now, corruption remains a major challenge in Kenya, with the Ethics and Anti-Corruption Commission tracing about 16 billion shillings in illegally acquired assets in the last financial year. It's a vice that continues to erode public trust and hinder national development. As the world prepares to mark International Anti-Corruption Day, we speak to Jackson Mue, Director of Field Services and Coordination at the Ethics and Anti-Corruption Commission, on the EACC's efforts to fight graft, its key achievements, and how Kenyans, especially the youth, can join in the fight against corruption. Mr. Mue, a very good evening and many thanks for joining us here on NTV. Now, the EACC is the lead agency in the fight against graft in the country. How would you describe the current state of corruption in Kenya?
Thank you, Michelle, and thank you for having me this evening to discuss this important topic on the state of corruption in the country. What I would say is there is still corruption in Kenya, but great efforts are being made by the institutions which have been established to fight corruption, where EACC is the lead agency in the fight against corruption. Quite sizable milestones have been realized in the area of corruption investigations and the prosecution of persons who are involved in corruption. Again, because EACC is fully aware, after a long experience, that the motivation for persons to engage in corruption is personal gain. And therefore, EACC has a very specific strategy which aims to remove the benefit of corruption from those who engage in it. And through this, recoveries have been made. These recoveries includes all manner of assets, both the movable and the immovable assets. Cash has been recovered, parcels of land, public land, which had been recovered, which had been taken away by public officials and other people who engage in corrupt conduct. And other forms of assets have actually been recovered by the Commission. If I was to look at statistics, I would be saying in the last 5 or so years, over 762 high-profile corruption cases have been concluded, and suspects presented before courts, and the cases are in different stages. Over 400 of them have been concluded in courts, and others are still pending, and more cases are still being taken to courts. And what I would say is, for the cases investigated by the EACC, the conviction rate, the cases which have been concluded in the court, stands at over 80%, because EACC is specialized and it employs experts who are able to investigate cases of corruption well, because they are professionals who understand the different facets of corruption. We do have all manner of professionals in EACC. We have accountants who are investigators. We have advocates who are investigators. We have engineers. We have ICT experts. We have career detectives and other forms of people.
Right, but when you talk about cases concluded and the conviction rate of cases investigated by the EACC, these are cases that have been prosecuted to conclusion, to the very end. Because the major concern with Kenyans is that investigations will be done, but we do not see the conviction and the prosecution at the very end, especially for high-profile cases.
That has been a concern with the majority of Kenyans, and there are many reasons why a perception would arise. Number one, these cases take a long time to be concluded in courts. On average, corruption cases take 3, 4, 5 years in courts. Sometimes members of the public are not able to track from the time these cases are initiated in court to the time they are concluded. But what I would say is these cases are being concluded in court at different times, and what we are seeing is personalities involved being convicted. And I would say EACC has realized achievement in prosecution and conviction of high-profile personalities. We have had accounting officers who have been convicted. We have had governors of counties who have been convicted. We have had other high-ranking government officials who have been convicted. And therefore, I would say the war against corruption continues to target all the perpetrators, but with priority on high-impact cases. And high-impact cases are the ones which involve politically exposed persons and basically persons entrusted with with big public office.
It's interesting you mentioned the caliber of persons who've been convicted for corruption cases, and when you mention governors and members of parliament, the high likelihood is that they are still then serving in office. As the world prepares to celebrate International Anti-Corruption Day on the 9th of December, one of the major challenges for Kenya in the fight against corruption has been a weak legal and policy framework for the implementation of Chapter 6 of the Constitution on integrity. How is the Commission dealing with this to ensure that there is a strong framework for this implementation?
Thank you, Michelle, for that question. It is true. Our Constitution, I would say, is still young because it's about from 2010. Chapter 6 of the Constitution brought a new beginning where leaders would be held accountable for the decisions they make while they are serving the positions they are entrusted to serve. And because of that, mechanisms which were established to deal with issues of leadership and integrity under Chapter 6 were established. Particularly, we have the Leadership and Integrity Act. The Leadership and Integrity Act, after implementing it for over 10 years now, gaps have been identified, particularly in regard to enforcement of the mechanisms for enforcement of Chapter 6 of the Constitution. And having realized some of these gaps, the Ethics and Anti-Corruption Commission, together with other stakeholders, the Office of the Attorney General and other relevant bodies, proposals have been made, discussions have been held with the National Assembly with a view to strengthen the law so that it can be effective and deliver the objective for which Chapter 6 was enacted.
EACC has been asking for prosecutorial powers in the fight against corruption. How is that going?
Prosecutorial powers is good. EACC, I know in the past, has agitated for prosecutorial powers. The reason why EACC would ask for prosecutorial powers is not because we do not have prosecutors, but we do know there are capacity gaps in most of the public offices. In EACC, there are capacity gaps. In the Office of the Director of Public Prosecution, there are capacity gaps. And the only logical reason why EACC has been agitating for prosecutorial powers is because EACC is of the view that officers who engage in the investigation of corruption cases, they understand them much better. And if they were to be entrusted with the responsibility of prosecuting those cases, it is the considered view of EACC that they will be more effective. While we still appreciate the efforts by the Office of the Director of Public Prosecution, the officers, some of them are good, they are still able to understand those files and prosecute, and that's why we have had conviction. But we can improve. And there are different ways in which these prosecutorial powers can be obtained. The Director of Public Prosecution is empowered by the Constitution, can delegate these powers to other institutions, and already it has been delegated to some institutions, and therefore it is the considered view of EACC. If the Director of Public Prosecution was to delegate prosecutorial powers to some of the highly trained advocates working with the EACC, then it will lessen the burden on the Director of Public Prosecution, because EACC will have officers who can still be able to prosecute these cases and still account to the Director of Public Prosecution, because that is the office empowered by the Constitution to do criminal prosecution.
All right.
Yeah.
Now, the world celebrates International Anti-Corruption Day on the 9th of December, and the theme this year is Uniting the Youth Against Corruption. How is the EACC engaging the youth in Kenya to take a stand against corruption, and why are they central to this year's theme?
Thank you for that question, Michelle. Let me just start by saying the International Anti-Corruption Day is going to be commemorated on the 9th, that is on Monday. And this commemoration will not just be done in Kenya, it is a global commemoration. And every year, the United Nations releases the theme. The theme for this year is Uniting the Youth Against Corruption, Shaping the Future with Integrity. Kenya has taken advantage of this, considering that the youth population in Kenya currently stands at about 75% of the population. And if the youth population stands at about 75% of the population, then it requires that the youth must be involved in governance of the country, must be involved in holding, in making sure that public resources which arise from taxes paid by Kenyans are prudently used. The youth must be involved because corruption has continued to deny the youth opportunities. Because despite the fact that they are the majority of the population, but when you look at distribution of opportunities in the country, the scale is not balanced. You'll find a lot of decision-making, discretion, and opportunities are still tied to the older generation, the other 25%. And therefore, what we are saying, youth should wake up, take their role, because they represent the future of this country, so that they can get involved in governance of the country, play an active role in ensuring that the resources of this country are used for purposes of developing the country. There are many ways in which they can engage in ensuring that governance is improved. We know the youth are leading in the area of technology. Technology is important in the fight against corruption. The youth using the various technology platforms, they have capacity to monitor programs of government. They have capacity to do advocacy because they can use relevant technologies to make sure that there is scrutiny of public projects, because public projects are done using public resources.
Right. Just as you mentioned that there has been many questions as to what safeguards are in place to protect whistleblowers when it comes to the fight against corruption. Are there loopholes there, and what policy reforms are needed in that sector?
Thank you for that question, Ms. Yeah. It is true, safeguards and the protection of whistleblowers is important. In the course of implementing the various anti-corruption laws, it has been identified that there do exist a gap in the area of protection of whistleblowers in Kenya. And I want to inform members of the public that currently we have a bill pending before the National Assembly for purposes of enacting a law to protect whistleblowers. That is an effort arising out of the realization that whistleblowers require protection. What we currently have is a witness protection agency. For the cases which are already being tried in court, persons who are supporting those cases as witnesses, there are existing mechanisms through the Witness Protection Agency to protect them. But for whistleblowers, we currently do not have a law. We currently do not have a law, but currently we have a bill pending before Parliament, and it is our hope that this bill will be given priority. It is enacted because it will provide a mechanism for purposes of protecting whistleblowers. Mm-hmm. Currently, what happens is whistleblowers, EACC and other investigative agencies just provide a mechanism to whistleblowers working with them to make sure that, number one, they protect themselves, and where within the law, the current existing laws, where the agencies are able to protect them, they still extend that protection. But we need an elaborate framework for protecting whistleblowers.
All right. Yes. I mean, there's a lot to discuss in the field of corruption. What specific policy reforms will the EACC be advocating for in this year's Anti-Corruption Day? And, you know, when you talk about policy, there's lots of bills that still need to be passed in Parliament. EACC the other day took issue with Senate for what they said was watering down the conflict of interest bill, a huge impediment in the fight against corruption. Is there a disconnect between the legislation and the implementation, especially when it comes to policy?
Thank you for that question. In Kenya, we do have a policy. We have the National Ethics and Anti-Corruption Policy, session of paper number 2 of 2018. The policy provides elaborate mechanisms. What has not been fully realized are the mechanisms of implementing the policy. And the policy provides for both the legal framework and the institutional framework. And when you look at the legal framework, laws have been enacted to fight corruption, including the Ethics and Anti-Corruption Commission Act. We have things like the Anti-Corruption and Economic Crimes Act. We have the Leadership and Integrity Act. We have the Bribery Act and other laws. Institutions, again, have also been established. That's why we have EACC established as the lead agency to fight corruption. And there are also other institutions. We have the Director of Public Prosecution. So we do have institutions. We do have laws, but there are still gaps in implementation. I think gaps arise sometimes because of some gaps in the same laws, some gaps in the existing laws, and also some weaknesses and the capacity-related issues in the institutions which have been established to fight corruption. So as this continues to be strengthened, we do believe the fight against corruption will be taken to another level. And that's the reason why we are, in this here, the Commission is making efforts to partner with the youth, because we take the sizable proportion of the youth. We do believe if the youth play their active role, there are many preventive strategies which will just be settled by the fact that youth will take advocacy in the area of promoting good governance and anti-corruption efforts. So the policy is there, but it is not fully implemented. But those efforts continue, and as gaps continue to be found, then specific actions are done. Like you have just mentioned, we have the conflict of interest bill, which is already pending before the National Assembly. Once that bill is enacted into law, we do expect issues related to conflict of interest will be settled. It is our hope that it is going to be enacted with proper and stringent mechanism to make sure that it is effective.
Let's wind up at the county level. EACC has conducted what they call a corruption risk assessment in various institutions as well as counties, which have been on the spot for what many have termed as devolved corruption. With the youth making up a majority of the electorate, what message would you like to tell the youth about the fight against corruption, especially with regard to the specific loopholes that the EACC flagged in counties?
Thank you for that question. It is true. One can see corruption as if it is devolved because we have a devolved governance of system, governance of government, devolved governance structure. Corruption follows resources. And therefore, once we came up with the devolved system, resources went to the counties. And for as long as the resources went to the counties, corruption started to arise because corruption follows resources. So our call for the youth is to be vigilant, to follow and monitor projects being implemented by the counties, to participate in public participation forums which approve budgets for the counties so that they are aware of the projects which the county governments are implementing. Again, because of the technology the youth is able to use, monitor the projects while they are being implemented. That way we are going to enhance transparency in the implementation of projects in the county governments.
All right.
For as long as they know what is happening, it is easy for them to play their role. But if they don't participate and they are not aware of the budget, of the activities which are in the budget, it becomes difficult for them to be effective.
Right, and they say information is power. Mr. Jackson Mue, many thanks for being with us tonight. He's the Director of Field Services and Coordination at the Ethics and Anti-Corruption Commission, speaking to us ahead of the International Anti-Corruption Day on the 9th of December. That conversation brings us to a close on NTV Weekend Edition tonight. Many thanks for watching. My name is Michelle Ngele Odhiambo. David Agondoa is a sign language interpreter. On behalf of the entire team here at NTV, good evening. Do enjoy the rest of your viewing.